Hey guys, what is up? It's Gianni here, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about social welfare policy making, which is the main topic of Chapter 18 in our AP Government textbook. Now, before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button below and subscribe to our channel. Alright, now let's begin. So, what exactly is social policy and social welfare? Well, basically, there are two types of programs within social policy. There are entitlement programs, which are government benefits that are given or that certain qualified individuals will receive regardless of whether they need them or not. And then there are means tested programs, which are government programs that are only made available to those that are below the poverty line. Okay, now, who's getting what? So there is something called income distribution, which is basically the way the government divides up the country's income into shares based on various groups and how much those groups make. So income is the amount of funds collected between any 2 points in time, which would usually be like the calendar year. And then another term that we need to know is wealth, which is the value of the assets that are already owned. Now, something important to remember here, and also wealth includes money, like the cash, like the money in your bank account or the cash you have. So, something important to know here is that actually 1/3 of America's wealth, 1/3, is owned by the top 1% of the population. So that's kind of ridiculous. And a trend we've seen ever since the 1960s is that the gap between the bottom 20% and the top 20% has grown significantly. Where, back in 1960, 4.9% of the income was in the lowest fifth, and 42% of the income was in the highest fifth, where now the lowest fifth is making about 3.4% of the income, and the highest fifth is actually making half of the income, of flat 50%. So, who's poor in America? Well, we have this thing called the poverty line, which is used to determine who's poor and who's not. Like we said, with the means tested programs, those below the poverty line automatically qualify for the means tested programs. And the way they determine this is they try to come up with a number based on whether you're an individual or how many members are in your family or whatever the case may be. And they want to know basically how much you need to make in a year to maintain an acceptable style of living, a standard of living. Now, a lot of people move in and out of the poverty line in just one calendar year. And it's also really misleading because the poverty line can actually be exaggerated a little bit to where someone may be above the poverty line, but it's still extremely difficult for them to make ends meet. So, yeah. And there is another trend that has been becoming more popular recently, and it's not necessarily a good one, but it's called the feminization of poverty. And what that basically is that women have increasingly become more poor. And what I mean by that is that the concentration of women who are poor has increased, especially unmarried women, and even more with unmarried women who have kids. So it becomes harder for them to support their kids, and they fall below the poverty line, trying to keep their kids healthy and whatnot. And another trend that has been, it's gone down a little bit since the 1960s, but it's still very significant in our country right now, and that is basically the fact that African Americans and Hispanics have a much higher population under the poverty line than do the white population or the Asian population in America. And although there have been efforts to reduce that, and some have worked, some haven't, it hasn't really gone down to a level where it still shouldn't be a concern. It still should be a concern because it's bad. Now, finally, we're going to be talking a little bit about taxation because, of course, without taxation, these programs wouldn't be able to work. Now, there are a few different types of taxes that are discussed. There's the progressive tax, which is basically people with a higher income will pay a higher tax rate. And the exact opposite of that would be the regressive tax. And basically, people with low income would have a much harder burden to pay their income taxes rather than those with a high income. And then somewhere right in the middle, we have the proportional tax, which just means that no matter how much you make, you're going to pay the same percentage. So someone in the top 1% would pay the same percentage as, say, someone just in the middle class. And then finally, we have the Earned Income Tax Credit, or the EITC, which is a negative income tax. So it's basically a refundable income tax given to those who need it, or even those who don't make enough money in a year to receive a federal income or to receive a tax return. They can qualify for the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit. All right, now we're going to move on to Anthony and Max's part. So I will catch y'all later. Thank you.
Hello, so I'm going to talk about social welfare policy elsewhere. So that includes mostly in the European nations. And then we're going to try to understand social welfare policy a little bit better right here in this little segment. So American social welfare programs are more limited in scope, but however, this is not the case in other democracies. Other national governments and their citizens often take a different approach to the problems of poverty and social welfare, such as comprehensive medical services provided through a national health service. Americans tend to see poverty and social welfare needs as individual rather than a governmental concern, while European nations tend to support greater governmental responsibility for these problems. Europeans often have a more positive attitude towards government, while Americans are more likely to distrust government action in areas like social welfare policy. Tax commensurates with the benefit of social policy are also commonplace in Western European nations, and this is far exceeding those in the United States. So, democracy and social welfare. There needs to be a proper balance between competition and compassion, and that is at the heart of policy disagreements about social welfare programs. In a democracy, these competing demands are resolved by government decision makers. These decision makers are aligned with and pay allegiance to various groups and societies. These groups include members of their legislative constituencies, members of their electoral coalitions, and members of their political party. In the social welfare policy arena, the competing groups are often quite unequal in terms of political resources. The elderly are relatively well organized and often have the resources needed to wield significant influence in support of their programs because they are the ones that vote and are politically active. The poor vote less and lack strong focused organization and money, so they are less represented within the government. Although government benefits are difficult to enact, the nature of democratic politics makes it difficult to withdraw them once they are established. Policymaking in the United States is very incremental in nature, building on past policies. Tremendous pressures come from supporters to keep or expand programs and to preserve them from elimination. Anthony here, and I'm going to tell you about the past, present, and future of welfare in the quickest way I can. So, pre-Great Depression era, there pretty much was no government welfare. Everything was on your own. You provided your own finances when you retired and all of that. There was no help from the government. But after the Great Depression, people were like, we want help from the government. So as a result, Franklin Roosevelt established a safety net for the poor and elderly through New Deal legislation. Next, President Johnson coined the term Great Society for his welfare initiatives that greatly helped the elderly and the poor. But after this, people started to depend on welfare too much, so Reagan decided welfare was a failure and it was profitable to be poor in the United States, so he cut many of the programs. In 1996, the Welfare Reform Act was signed by President Clinton. As a result, each state runs its own program for welfare. People must find work within 2 years or they lose benefits, and you only can be on this program for 5 years maximum in your lifetime. So the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, or PRWORA for short, each state determines who got welfare and how much they got. In the TAMF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, needy families, they'd get the money. So they get an average of $360 every month. But as we go on through this time, welfare is seen as unpopular because it's supporting the immigrants because they're coming here from their destitute or their impoverished countries and they're getting a higher standard of living due to welfare. So currently, due to the economic recession and terrorism, the budgets for these programs are starting to drain because people aren't focusing on the poor too much. So Social Security right now pays about $1,100 a monthly, which is 31% of the average monthly wage. And that's currently paid by 3 workers. And as there's more retirees of the baby boomers, we might have to change the rate to lower or have a higher tax on the people that are paying. So how Social Security works is current workers pay into the Social Security Trust Fund and the fund pays for the current elderly people. So the future, it's gloomy. People have tried to reform the system, but there's no support because they want their money. So the elderly who vote for people, they're not going to vote for someone who's going to take away their money. So obviously, there's not much we can do about that. So in 2038, payouts will exceed income. So the question is, will they cut benefits or raise payful taxes? Now it's time to see the movie trailer of the century.